At one time or another, many of us have dreamed of finding buried treasure, like something out of an adventure film. While most are never lucky enough, some find treasure hiding right in their own backyard. Matthew Emanuel, a Staten Island resident, is one of the lucky few. However, his treasure wasn't buried. Instead, a rusted, locked safe hid in plain sight in Emanuel's backyard. Emanuel assumed that the rusted box was merely a random electrical cabinet. For years, he left it alone, never touching it. But when the family started doing some renovations, Emanuel needed to take a closer look at what he thought was just a rusted box. When he opened it, Emanuel's heart stopped. What he discovered triggered a chain of events that would have far-reaching results. For a little over 4 years, Matthew Emanuel lived with his beautiful family, wife Maria, and son Alex, in the exclusive Greenbelt neighborhood of Todd Hill, Staten Island. At the time, Emanuel worked as a financial advisor, and the family lived in a beautiful home. They all enjoyed an incredible, peaceful life in suburbia. Over the years, the family decorated and explored almost every inch of their large home. While the family enjoyed their house for nearly half a decade, they never imagined something hid in their garden that could make a remarkable difference in their lives. Surprisingly, the treasure hadn't even been buried. It lay tucked away in the shadows in the corner of the Emanuel family backyard, waiting for someone to stumble across it. However, the hidden object contained a lot more than treasure. It also held the answer to a years-old mystery in their neighborhood, in the Emanuel family's backyard. Nestled in the ground by the side of their fence, a great mystery lay waiting for someone to find it. It was a random box, one that no one in the family had seen before. Furthermore, tons of poison ivy had grown all over the box, so no one in the family even went near the box, wanting to avoid the ivy's stinging burn. In the winter of 2018, New York State experienced some particularly harsh storms. Matthew Emanuel first noticed the box the morning after the storm, as some deer munched on the vegetation covering it. Time went on, and the Emanuel family continued to ignore the rusted box. After all, they had much bigger things to worry about. Most noticeably, winter storms had caused some severe damage to their backyard. Now, as spring came along and the storm had died down, they would no longer leave their garden in that state. As a result of the extensive damages that winter caused, Matthew Emanuel had to completely redesign his family's back garden. Still thinking the box was electrical, Emanuel realized he would need to work around the box during his renovation. As the work grew and the difficulty increased, he made the decision to call in some outside help. So Matthew Emanuel started looking for an expert landscaper. They decided to go with bamboo, as it's stronger during storms. Emanuel found a horticulturist who specializes in exotic plants to help him plant bamboo on the side for more privacy. The landscaper, Robert Foley, goes by the nickname Bamboo Bob. When he arrived at the Emanuel's property, Bamboo Bob admitted he had never seen anything like the Emanuel's odd rusted box. What exactly was he looking at? So Bamboo Bob asked Emanuel what he knew about the box. After an hour or so, Bob and the workers uncovered the rusted box. Once free, the workers turned it over, revealing a dial. The rusted box turned out to be a locked safe, made out of thick metal, rusted from the years outside. Now they had a brand new mystery to solve. What hid inside the locked safe? And perhaps more importantly, who did it belong to? Emanuel instructed the workers to move the safe to the deck of the house so they could further investigate it. At first, Emanuel tried to learn how to open safes and looked into getting a locksmith. However, eventually, he and Bamboo Bob grew tired of waiting and decided to open it. Once they finally pried it open, using some construction equipment no less, the contents stunned Emanuel to his core. The first thing we saw was stacks of hundreds, about 3 inches thick, wet and stuck together, Bamboo Bob said. The safe contained small zipped plastic bags of gold, diamond rings, earrings, and other jewelry. As it turns out, the safe was not waterproof. After years of sitting in the backyard of his Staten Island home, many of the bills continued in the safe had almost disintegrated. Not only that, but some of the large wads of bills had stuck together after many seasons of soaking and drying. If Emanuel even tried to lift one bill off the stack, they might all rest in peace. Over the next few days, Emmanuel peeled apart some of the wet dollar bills and set them aside to dry. It started to seem too hard to salvage most of the bills, let alone all of them. As he continued to work, Matthew Emmanuel realized that he could only manage to salvage a small part of the cash. Unfortunately, the weather had simply done too much damage to the majority of the tender. Furthermore, the bills only made up a small portion of the safe's contents, and Emmanuel didn't know how much some of the jewelry would go for. Matthew Emmanuel knew he needed to determine the worth of the rest of his newly discovered treasure. However, another question burned in the back of his mind, one he didn't think he wanted to know the answer to: how much money had he lost? Nevertheless, Emmanuel set out to answer his question. Unfortunately, by Emmanuel's calculations, he lost roughly $5,000 worth of $100 bills due to exposure and damage. Still, he knew he had managed to save at least a dozen or so bills over his long process. After calculating his gains the first time, he needed to count again. Emmanuel could not believe it. He had saved over $16,000. Finally, Emmanuel knew how much he had earned from the safe in cash, and it was a lot more than he had ever dreamed of earning from an old rusty box. Furthermore, this only accounted for the cash in the safe. He still needed to count the jewelry and the gold. Who would hide a safe in the backyard and then just forget about it? After he finished counting all the cash, Emmanuel proceeded to his next task. He wanted to do an inventory of all the riches and jewelry that were also in the safe box alongside all those dollar bills. The gold kept stacking up to the point where Emmanuel needed to use other tools just to keep track of everything. While he measured and cataloged the goods, Emmanuel came across a piece of paper in a plastic bag that changed everything. Emmanuel put all the jewelry aside and focused his attention on the piece of paper. He opened the plastic bag and unfurled the piece of paper. To his surprise, there was an address on it. He immediately knew he had to look it up online and figure out where it led. For a moment, Emmanuel wondered if the address would lead him to a criminal, instead of someone who had simply lost their safe. However, what criminal would leave their home address with their stash? As it turned out, to Emmanuel's surprise, the address he found on the piece of paper stashed deep inside the safe box wasn't too far away. Surprisingly, he didn't even need a car to get there. He could walk. Just a few days after discovering real-life buried treasure in his backyard, he decided to pay a visit to the address that he'd found inside the mysterious rusted box. Emmanuel was determined to find out where that box came from. On April 30, 2018, Emmanuel knocked on the door of the address he found. An elderly woman answered the door, and Emmanuel introduced himself before cutting right to the chase. "I have a strange question for you," he said. "Have you ever been robbed?" The woman started to shake, which could only mean one of two things. She was either terribly upset or extremely excited. The question that Emmanuel asked left the elderly woman extremely surprised. Still shaking, the woman confirmed Emmanuel's suspicious. Someone had robbed her. Then, the painful memories resurfaced as the elderly woman attempted to explain what had happened to her. While Emmanuel felt touched because of the woman's reaction, he felt relieved to have found the true origins of the mystery box on his backyard. He had finally found the answers he was looking for. In the end, everything turned out for the best. The night after the 2011 Christmas, a burglar broke into her home. They had no idea what was going on inside their household. By the time she and her husband realized what had happened, the thief was too far away for them to even try and catch him. The criminal left their home with $52,000 worth in jewelry and cash. Unfortunately, all the savings of the couple had vanished in a heartbeat. But how could this happen in such an exclusive neighborhood? At the time of the robbery in 2011, Staten Island was facing a wave of crime. No one knew who the unseen menace was, but they called him Ninja Burglar because of how stealthy he had been. Even worse, the criminal was surprisingly successful. From 2005 to 2015, the Ninja Burglar robbed over 200 homes in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Just in Staten Island, he stole from 160 homes. Could this also be one of his handiworks? A man called Robert Costanzo was finally arrested in Staten Island back in 2016. Costanzo had a criminal past and was in court for something unrelated when he confessed, and they charged him for robbery. He admitted to the investigators that he was responsible for over 100 burglaries in which he stole $4 million worth in property. They sentenced him to 22 years in prison. By the time the burglar was convicted, the woman that Emmanuel met had already lost hope. The police told her that she would never see her belongings again. Now that he had finally solved the backyard mystery, Emmanuel told the woman that he might have her belongings. "Well, I think I have your stuff," Emmanuel said. He continued, "Why don't you come over to my house, and I will show it to you." Emmanuel brought her to the kitchen and showed her the safe. When the elderly woman saw the jewelry and the stacks of the dollar bills, she was overwhelmed with emotions. She immediately burst into tears and hugged Emmanuel. After 6.5 years of living with the trauma of losing her most valuables and being told over and over that she would never see them again, a stranger knocked on her door to give her back the hope. Thankfully, now they were right here in front of her eyes, and what happened next was the best thing that had happened to her in years. Emmanuel did the right thing. He returned all of the safe's contents to its real owner. Emmanuel was satisfied with the result. In the end, with the help of stormy weather, some deer, and the curiosity of Bamboo Bob, Emmanuel managed to solve a crime that the police hadn't solved in years. Furthermore, he did it in a little less than a week. To the safe's owner, Emmanuel is a true hero, and a real-life hero deserves a proper reward. In the end, Emmanuel refused to take any awards. He told the press that the only award he could hope for was good karma. In his mind, Emmanuel knew he did the right thing. Matthew Emmanuel, in particular, wanted to make sure that he would never forget his extraordinary backyard adventure. So, Emmanuel decided to commemorate the wonderful experience with a small memento. Right next to the bamboo that Bamboo Bob and his team planted, the family placed a ceramic elephant.